The warmest of greetings to you.
Who are you?
I am your storyteller, Chip. And you know, before this story began, a young girl called Lola was getting ready for the best Christmas ever. She lived in Mexico and she had been picked to play Mary for her village posada, a special Christmas carnival procession. Playing Mary meant that she was going to get to ride on a donkey. But it wouldn't just be any donkey. It was going to be her pet donkey, Don Pedro. Lola had waited for this the whole year, since last year's posada. The posada was her favorite time of year, that special Christmas procession, which would always start over the bridge on the other side of the river where the village kept its church. Most of the people from the village would gather in the church and then they would start their procession over the bridge back into the village where some people had been waiting in their houses. And those in the procession would go up to the houses and they would knock on the door and they would sing a song begging for shelter. I can teach you that song now, actually, if you like. It's a brilliant Spanish song, and it goes like this. En el nombre del cielo, which means in the name of heaven. So we will start by pointing up to heaven and just swaying from side to side as we sing En el nombre del cielo. Then they sing Os pido posada, which means I beg you for some shelter. So we'll make a little shelter like this and we'll sing Os pido posada. Then they say Pues no puede andar, which means I can't go on any further. So we'll sway as we hold up a hand and say Pues no puede andar. And finally, mi esposa amada, which means my wife is very tired. So rest your head on your hands as we sing Mi esposa amada. Let's see if we can do all of those lines together. En el nombre del cielo, os pido posada, pues no puede andar, mi esposa amada. And every single house they knocked on, they'd open the door, they'd sing that song, and then the people inside the house would sing and answer back to them. And their answer was always no. And the way that they would sing this would be saying, Aquí no es maison, which means there is no room in my house. So for this one, hold up both your hands as we sway from side to side and sing, Aquí no es maison. Then they'd sing, Según adelante, which means keep on going. So imagine that you're riding a donkey and singing, Sigan adelante. The next line would be, Yo no debo abrir, which basically means, my door is shut to you. So again, hold up both of your hands as we sing, Yo no debo abrir. And the very last line would be, No se algún tunante, which means, I don't want no trouble. No, I'm not letting you in, but please don't hurt me. So for this one, you're going to wiggle your finger as you sway from side to side, going, No se algún tunante. Let's see if we can do all of those lines together, shall we? Aquí no es mesón, sigan adelante. Yo no debo abrir, no sé algún tunante. after they'd sung no, the people from that house would then actually join the procession, and it would keep on going through the village until it came to their final destination, the school. And when they knocked on the school doors and they sang their song, it would be opened by the headmaster, who would sing the answer, yes! And they would sing that by singing Entran Santos Peregrinos, which means basically, come inside, holy pilgrims. We're going to sing Enter Santos Peregrinos. So give yourself a nice little hug. Well, that will be Entran Santos Peregrinos, Peregrinos. And then they sing Receban estancion, which means you can rest here for a while. So again, we'll put our heads on our hands and just sway from side to side. Receban estancion. Then they sing Que anques pabre la morada, which means, well, my house isn't that good really. It's a little bit messy. So we'll shrug our shoulders for this one and then make our house. So, que anques pabre la morada, la morada. And finally they sing Os lo doy de corazón, which means please enjoy it with my blessing. So for this one, our action will be Os lo doy de corazón. Os lo doy de corazón. Perfect. Let's give it a try all together. Entre santos peregrinos, peregrinos, receban esta canción, que aunque es pobre la morada, os la doy de corazón. And then everybody would go into the school hall and enjoy a huge Christmas party with a massive great feast and, of course, the best Mexican tradition I know of, hitting the piñata. Have you hit a piñata before? It's one of those creations made of papier-mâché, like a Christmas star, which they then have a mallet to whack and whack and whack. They take it in turns to whack it until at last someone would whack it and it would burst open, showering sweets on everybody. And the children in the hall would get to come and eat those sweets, but the person who actually burst the piñata, they would get some pesos, some Mexican pocket money. And last year, the one who managed to burst open the piñata was Lola. And when the head teacher had come to give her those pesos for her pocket money, she knew exactly what she was going to do with it. She was going to buy a donkey, a baby donkey, who could then grow up with her throughout the rest of the year and carry her when she got to play Mary in the next year's posada. That is exactly what she did. As soon as there were some new donkeys that spring, she bought a beautiful, cute little donkey and called him Don Pedro. Lola and Don Pedro became the best of friends. They played together all while that little donkey was growing up. And when he was strong enough, he began to carry Lola to school every day. And sure enough, when it got to winter, Lola was chosen to be Mary and Don Pedro was chosen to be the Christmas donkey for the Mexican posada. That's why, right at the start of this story, Lola was really excited for the best Christmas ever. And it was just as she was tying up Don Pedro and putting his padlock on before dinner on exactly the same day as the posada that everything went wrong. Because that was the moment when her mum let her know that they would get to the church and Don Pedro would have to stay outside while everybody else went inside. And Lola couldn't understand that. She said to her mum, "That doesn't make any sense. Why Why can't Don Pedro come inside? He's part of the procession. He's an important part of the procession. He has to come in while we practice. But her mum had just said, "Don't take that tone with me, Lola. I don't make the rules. The rules are no animals in church." And Lola did have a bit of an attitude because Don Pedro was her best friend. She said, "But why? It's not fair." And so now her mum was saying to her, "Don't shout, Lola." That just made Lola shout even more. And that meant that her mum began to shout even more, saying, "If you keep on shouting like this, well, I am going to tell the church you are not going to be Mary anymore." And then Lola said something that maybe she didn't actually want to say, but the words came out from her mouth before she could think of them. "If Don Pedro's not allowed in church, I don't want to be Mary." To which her mum said, "Fine!" And with that, Lola suddenly felt the sting of tears in her eyes. She ran out of the garden, ran into the house, ran upstairs, jumped into her bed, pulled her duvet over her head, and pressed her tears into the pillow. And she felt so confused. She really wanted to go on the posada, but she also felt like life really wasn't fair. And a little while later, her mum opened the door and said, "All right then, Lola, I've spoken with the vicar, I've spoken with your head teacher. They found another Mary and they found another donkey. But you can still join us for dinner and you can still join us as we go on the posada." But there, in the pillow, Lola just kept on crying and said, "No, don't want to go." A little while later, Lola heard her family leaving the house and her mum calling up the stairs, "We're going now, Lola. Are you sure you don't want to come?" Lola didn't even say goodbye. And so with that, her family left. And Lola was left alone in the house. After a while, she got up from the bed, feeling utterly miserable. And she knew that there was only one thing that could cheer her up, really. And that was her best friend, Don Pedro. He could always put a smile on her face. So she went downstairs to head into the garden and find him. But when she got out there in the garden, Don Pedro was nowhere to be seen. She saw the padlock lying there on the grass and realized what had happened. She had got so upset with her mum that she hadn't finished locking him up. And of course, it was Lola's job to feed Don Pedro, made sure he got dinner. Her family wouldn't have done that. So when they left, Don Pedro probably went off in search of food. Lola rushed out of the garden and began rushing down the streets of her village, calling, "Don Pedro! Don Pedro!" But the village was eerily empty. Most people were waiting in their houses for the procession to come by and knock on their doors, or they were at the church, actually practicing for the start of the procession. So street after street was devoid of people. And as Lola called out, "Don Pedro!" all she heard was her own voice echoing. Maybe you could be the echo if you like. "Don Pedro! Don Pedro!
Don Pedro!
And then, at last, in the distance, she heard the faint sound of a donkey. Do you know the noise that a donkey makes? If you do, maybe make that sound nice and quietly like you're a donkey in the distance. Let's give it a try. Well, Lola heard that sound and knew straight away it was coming from the direction of the river. And suddenly it all made sense. Don Pedro had seen her family heading off for the posada, And he knew from all the practices that they'd done that he was supposed to be part of the posada, so he probably followed after the family thinking that they'd forgotten him. So Lola started running in the direction of the river, again calling out, "Don Pedro!" and hearing that noise of the donkey a little bit louder. It was definitely her donkey. She could recognize Don Pedro out of 100 donkeys. She kept on going, she saw the bridge, and when she got to the bridge, she called out again, "Don Pedro!" And she heard the sound of Don Pedro's voice even louder. But that made him sound like he was really close by. She couldn't see him over the bridge. She couldn't see him around her. There had to be only one direction he could be in. And when Lola looked down the riverbank below the bridge, that's where she saw her donkey, stuck there in the muddy riverbank. He had clearly gone down to get himself a drink from the river and got stuck in the mud. So Lola said, "Don't worry, Don Pedro, I'm coming." And she climbed down the riverbank as carefully as she could to get to her donkey and pull him out. But he was really stuck fast in the mud, and Lola was only about 6 years old, so maybe she could do with your help as well. And as soon as his legs popped out from the mud, it surprised Lola so much that she fell back and twisted her ankle. She lay there in the mud, fresh tears filling up her eyes. And as she looked up at the sky, something else caught her eye and filled her with dread. One of the legs of the bridge, all of which were made of wood, one of those legs had begun to rot. It looked like it was on the verge of collapse. All it needed was for a heavy load to pass that bridge, maybe a whole group of people all traveling at once, and that leg would crumble, and the bridge would collapse into the river, possibly causing great harm, maybe even loss of life. And was there going to be a big group of people coming over that bridge anytime soon? The posada. Lola knew she needed to warn everybody at the church, but as she tried to get up, she had twisted her ankle. So she called Don Pedro over, took a hold of him, and asked him to move back to help her up onto her feet. Together, slowly, they clambered up the side of the muddy riverbank, and once they were on the road, Lola got onto the back of Don Pedro and guided him over the bridge, taking great care to keep her away from the side with the rotten leg. As they got over the bridge, though, Lola could hear them singing in the church. They were practicing the posada. Can we have a sing of that song really quietly, like we're in the distance? En el nombre del cielo, os pido posada, pues no puede andar mi esposa amada. They would be leaving any moment now. Lola tried to spur Don Pedro on to trot as fast as he possibly could. And as they got closer to the church, she heard the voices getting louder. En el nombre del cielo, os pido posada, pues no puede andar mi esposa amada. Lola knew she could not wait. She went straight up to the church door and pushed them open, and Don Pedro carried her inside. And the moment they got in there, everybody else was in the middle of that song, singing nice and loudly now. En el nombre del cielo, Bruno, Bruno! And the moment they noticed the donkey, a huge cry carried all the way down the church. Some people were pointing and glaring at Lola with angry expressions. Others looked really shocked. But Lola's family were there at the side of the church, very red-faced, very embarrassed, trying to pretend that they didn't know this little girl on the donkey. People were starting to shout at Lola, they were starting to grumble, they were gasping, and over all of that noise, Don Pedro made his loudest ever and at that, the church went quiet. Just long enough for Lola to very quickly call out, "The bridge is breaking! If the posada goes over the bridge, it will crumble and people might get hurt or die!" Well, this sounded like something that everybody should take good care to listen to. And the vicar put on that face that grown-ups have when they want to sort something out. And he told some men to just head to the bridge and check what Lola was saying. It wasn't long before they rushed back, panting, to say that Lola was right. The leg of the bridge was rotten all the way through, and if the posada went over just as they planned it, the bridge would collapse. Well, when everybody in the church heard this, suddenly their faces changed. They weren't looking angry or shocked anymore, but they were looking so grateful to Lola and Don Pedro, and they all gave her 3 cheers. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! And after they had all finished patting Lola on the back and patting Don Pedro on the head and laughing and cheering with her, the vicar hushed everybody down and said, "We should take this as a lesson. For Christmas, Christians celebrate the time when Mary and Joseph were knocking on people's doors and they were always being turned away. And here in this church, we've been doing exactly the same to the animals that are just as much a part of God's creation as we are. So, just as Christians at Christmas time believe that Jesus came so that everybody would be welcome in God's house, so too shall we let animals be welcome in this house, this church, especially at Christmas time and especially donkeys." And with that, everybody gave another great big cheer. And Don Pedro gave another huge ee-aw. And Lola gave him a big hug and said, "Yes, Don Pedro, I told you so. It would be the best Christmas ever."
Enter pilgrims, holy pilgrims, holy pilgrims, rest a while here in this place. Though lowly is my dwelling, please enjoy it with my grace. Please enjoy it with my grace.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with me. I love stories and I love Christmas, so I think that's why that has to be one of my favorite stories. But you know, I know another brilliant story about a donkey at Christmas time from the Caribbean. And if you'd like to hear that story too, then all you need to do is have a go at my epic challenge, and then I'll send it to you. Have a read below for the instructions on what you need to do. Right now though, it only remains for me to say cheerio and happy Christmas. So, cheerio and happy Christmas! Ho 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 ho!